Joining us again right now via Zoom chat is a retired Lieutenant Colonel Matt Dooley from the Army. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
We've been covering quite a bit of the story of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. You were on just before the invasion kicked off, and we wanted to have you back. A lot of the story is on the humanitarian side of it, for sure. But I want to ask you some questions from a sort of a military perspective, a strategy perspective, because there's a lot I don't personally understand here. Just today, Rudy reported on a story about Russians poking holes in their gas tanks, intentionally dumping their oil. I mean, there was the story on the Ukraine side, for instance. They got all the planes up, I heard, before the invasion happened, but they couldn't mobilize the people until a day or two into it. There's a lot here that seems kind of not smart or not straight, or I don't understand. And I wanted to get your perspective. Matt Dooley, what do you say?
Well, yeah, first and foremost, there's a lot of misinformation out there on both sides. And so you have to have a bit of a trained eye just to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. But a few things have come very, very clear in the first week or so of this campaign. The first thing is, from a military perspective, one of the hardest things to do is to coordinate a multi-pronged assault, particularly something that involves about 3 corps or more worth of maneuver assets. We're talking about 7 different lines of advance, 4 of them primary. Each of those has to have its own close air support, its own preparatory fires, and there has to be a logistics plan to conduct resupply, both in terms of fuel and food, as well as ammunition. In the end, that's something very, very hard for a well-trained, first world modern army to be able to accomplish, let alone the Russian military, which is about 80% conscript, meaning those who are serving a 2-year mandatory service.
Oh, wow.
The last time the Russian army did this is when they were the Soviet army in May of 1945. The campaigns that they have waged in smaller countries like in taking Crimea with the little green men, or going after Georgia and the fight in 2008, or some of the things they've done in Syria, are nowhere near the scale of complexity of what Putin is trying to pull off.
It is very interesting. I heard a report this morning that long convoy, 40-mile convoy headed towards Kyiv, some of the vehicles in the front of it were attacked and pretty much put it to a stop. Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The issue is, if you're going to do open maneuver warfare with heavy armor in that region of the world, it helps for the ground to be frozen this time of year. You can get off of the roads and you can move, 35, 40-ton vehicles with relative ease. You're still burdened by having to cross the river at bridges and those choke points, but you can still maneuver across the terrain. Along the border between Belarus and northern Ukraine are the Pripyat marshes. If those are frozen, you can move your forces across. But this year, they're not. And so the Russian army is largely roadbound, which means you're predictable. And if I'm establishing a defensive position at an intersection or a key piece of terrain that you have to move through as a defile or choke point, that's where I'm going to stop you, because I don't have to destroy much in the front of your column to back you up. The second issue they're dealing with are their lack of logistics. The first wave that went in last Wednesday only had about 72 hours worth of resupply. That includes fuel and food. When they ran out, the fuel trucks and the logistics weren't there. And so that first wave ran out of gas, literally. The second wave that went in after them ran into the same problems. And so that's what you see stacked up. Trying to get fuelers up and down a 2-lane road to top off the vehicles in the front while you're under fire and getting planked by javelin missiles or UAVs carrying laser-guided weapons, that's a problem. And so those are the challenges the Russians are dealing with right now.
That is something I think that I haven't considered. So thank you for adding that to the conversation. Certainly, I mean, it's hard enough to get around here in Houston in a gigantic freeway that we have here. But I'm wondering if you could speak to the point of why did it seems as if there, and I don't know if this is true, but why did it seem that Ukraine didn't rally their troops before. I mean, Russia was at the door for quite some time, but it seems that they weren't ready to mobilize their troops. Do you have any information on that, or is that just something that got lost in translation, like between Western media and Europe?
Yeah, you have to do two things. You have to imagine that Ukraine has been at war for roughly 8 years. That the attempt to take the Donbass region, those two quote unquote breakaway provinces of southeastern Ukraine, that's been going on for a while. And Putin had before that annexed Crimea. So that's been going on for a while. So if you're a Ukrainian soldier, you've been at this for a while. And so there's this sense of, okay, West, you guys are just waking up to the fact that we've been in conflict. The second piece to this is also that, candidly, no one expected Vladimir Putin to launch the go for broke, all chips into the table, ante-up sort of poker game that he's got going on now. They thought that he might try to annex those two breakaway provinces, might try to pressure a couple of areas. But the idea of going all in, as it became apparent he was going to do this over the last couple of weeks, was harder for folks to accept. And the third thing I'll say is that the Ukrainian military is dwarfed by the Russian military. It's tough to look ready when it's David versus Goliath. They're doing the best they can, but they're outnumbered in aircraft and tanks. And once it became apparent that the Russians were coming from all directions, then he put the country into a full military footing, and you've got everybody fighting now.
We have just a couple of minutes before we go to break. We're talking with Lieutenant Colonel Matt Dooley, retired from the Army. I just don't understand, how could the Russian Army be so underprepared, so lacking in proper planning and logistics? I mean, it's mind-boggling how bad this is.
Yeah, amongst my military peers, we talk, and that's our opinion too. That we're surprised that the initial attack did not go with the shock and awe that he had planned, and that it was so badly coordinated from all different angles. That's not how you do this, and it's just getting worse.
I guess I should say I'm glad it didn't go better. I mean, I don't want it to go better, but everyone, I think, would have expected the Russian military to be just vastly better than this. Cluster bombs are being used. There's been reports that civilians have been used as human shields on tanks. There have been reports of direct targeting of apartment complexes and much, much more. Have war crimes, in your estimation, been committed here?
Yeah, I believe so. And here's why. The use of indiscriminate firepower against civilian targets that have no military value is something that puts you right square in the crosshairs for something like that. Geneva Convention 4, what we did after World War II, acknowledging the brutality of that, is what establishes the rules that take civilian targets off the table. Once you've crossed into that lane, then you start losing your legitimacy from a political perspective. But from a human perspective, you reduce war to a more baser level. And that's what we're seeing now. And I think it's a product of the frustration that the Russian army is feeling for their lack of progress, military to military, versus the Ukrainian armed forces, who were dug in and acquitting themselves quite well. What you've seen the last 48 hours or so is the use of cluster munitions launched from ground-to-ground rockets, the use of and deliberate targeting of missiles against population centers, whether it's the center of Kharkiv or locations inside Kyiv. Both of those cities are important, and both of those cities have hundreds of thousands of people who still live in them, who have absolutely no military connection at all.
Colonel Dooley, you're an expert in a lot of things, including AI and things like that. And one of the things that we're seeing right now is a massive propaganda movement, with both from Ukraine, from Russia, and who knows about the United States. And so it's very hard to tell what is true, what is not, especially whenever there are things like clips from video games and clips from old movies, and nowadays we can create scenes that never existed out of CGI and just put it out there. And who could possibly tell the difference, especially if we're watching it from the U.S.? I'm thinking of where there were rumors saying that the Russians sent out a mobile crematorium, and that there have been over 5,000 deaths from the Russian soldiers. And I'm thinking to myself, what is true, what is not? I have no idea what it is. What's your analysis of this propaganda from a strategy perspective, or from whatever perspective?
Well, I think we talk about multi-domain operations, and that first layer before you even get down to the battlefield and the exchange of fire on the two-way rifle range. In multi-domain operations, that first layer, that first domain is in the area of politics, information warfare, psychological operations. That's very real. And with the advent of better technology, as you mentioned, the idea of creating deep fakes, and incorporating very detailed graphics, it's possible to create a narrative if you're not trained to screen that out, if you don't know what to look for. So it may be interesting to you, but I would always verify, 2 or 3 different independent sources if you can. There are a couple of different places you can go. Twitter, and a lot of the videos you see may have some geolocation data, so you can reference both a timestamp and a location stamp to see where that actually occurred. If it doesn't have that kind of metadata, it's harder to prove whether or not it's real or not. There are a couple of good websites you can go to that are free, open source, crowdsource, where people are hanging videos from wherever they are in the Ukrainian countryside. And you can kind of put together and piece together a little bit better truth than you can if you're just getting it through, well, let's say a Russian news source. One thing's for sure, though, we know that the Russian army is backed up and that they have taken thousands of casualties. Typically, that information is on a 1 or 2 day delay, and you'll see that come through more approved sources. Some of the stories you are hearing are taken from interviews done with captured Russian soldiers. So there is some validity to the fact that we've got an army in disarray, at least the first couple of waves, and a lot of conscript soldiers who are self-sabotaging or refusing to fight or surrendering and walking away. That you can't deny.
Mm.
How do you think that this is going to play out? I've heard a couple people say that at this point, it's gotten to the extent that Putin cannot surrender. He cannot back out. He has to keep going until either he takes Kyiv or that there's major concessions that are given to him, and that we're going to have to come up with a deal that's going to be a lose for everyone and no one walks away completely happy. What do you think about a possible solution to the problem?
Yeah, I think he certainly put himself in a bad position. Even if he's able to capture Kyiv tonight, even if the Ukrainian government capitulates, even if he's successful with his military taking all of Ukraine, which he intends to do, he's accomplished a couple of things that he can't back out of. First, he says his concern was security, that he didn't want NATO right up against his Russian borders. Taking Ukraine, all of it, accomplishes exactly that. He'll have Poland on his immediate western front. So there's some degree of inconsistency in that logic. The second thing is he's now an international pariah. The Russian economy is in shambles. The banking system has been largely cut off from global access. Everyone's pulled out, and even the Swiss have taken a side. When's that ever happened?
Never. Yeah.
At the end, if he's successful in getting his tactical aims here, he's a strategic failure no matter what he does. So if you're the West, what do? How do you create a golden bridge that he can retreat across, to borrow a Sun Tzu term? Mm. There are a number of different courses of action where we can speculate on where that happens, but you've got to get inside his head. I'm just not convinced he hasn't adopted a bit of an apocalyptic view here, where he's going to get what he wants, or he's going to burn it all down. That concerns me.
I guess a follow-up question to that is, what comes next? It's pretty obvious that Russians want Kyiv, or maybe not. I'm not entirely sure. It seems as if they're forming a type of encircling the city. But what comes next? There's talk about nuclear war, talk about sending out nukes. Maybe this becomes an elevated state of affair here. What say you?
Yeah, that's certainly a concern. That Putin has now stepped outside of the normal bounds of constraint and restraint and mutually assured destruction that kept the lid on things during the Cold War. He now brandishes that nuclear capability often in his rhetoric to try to, at least in this case, tell NATO, stay out of this. This is our fight. He's communicating and threatening the West that he's willing to go there, and that's new. It makes us wonder how serious is he in this great poker game. Putin has never had an asset he hasn't been willing to use, including assassination and poisoning people. So you have to take what he says seriously so that you can frame a proper response and a series of things you'll do and you won't do. So I'm glad I'm not working for State Department right now. I'm glad I'm not in the National Security Council trying to advise the president, because this is a tough one. In the end, we're going to have greater pressure as the humanitarian side of this becomes more apparent as Kyiv and Kharkiv continue to be surrounded. That you're going to see this question of how far do we allow atrocities to go before we intervene directly. Right now, we've got no troops on the ground, and NATO is not directly intervening. We've not invoked Article 5. And so long as we remain there, then this remains controlled. But if something happens where one of the NATO countries is attacked or bombarded, then we've got a different question, different scenario.
We have a comment here from one of our CDT insiders. Alaric asks, is it possible that Russia wanted to go slowly in order to keep Ukraine more intact and not to do too much harm to the people in hopes of gaining Ukraine as a more useful state against NATO? Could that be a part of their strategy in what we've seen?
Yeah, I can see some logic in that. In the opening phases, you did see the Russian version of shock and awe, lightning strikes, precision strikes, and the attempt to go quickly with special forces or airborne to seize key terrain, like the air base, the airfield, the airport to the northwest of Kyiv. But all of those failed. That they did not have enough to do the kind of capitulation strikes that they were hoping for. I believe that they thought they could do a couple of lightning rounds, squeeze the Ukrainian government. Zelensky would flee, and the Ukrainian military would quickly collapse. None of that happened, and so now you're into the grind phase of having to push your forces in quantity forward, and that's not working out either.
Wow. There are also reports of Russian saboteur teams running around. In fact, there's been reports that they've shot and murdered some civilians as a result. So there's a lot of very concerning news coming out of this. So let's continue to pray about it. But one last question with just about a minute to go, Matt Dooley. Why would the U.S. not cut off oil and gas and natural gas out of Russia? Wouldn't that hit them hardest?
Yeah, that's a real good question. We've pulled a lot of the things we said we were going to use as last resort to take the Russian economy off the table. This is one of the last ones. Our issue is we're pulling quite a bit of oil, some 675 million gallons. 675 million barrels from the Russians, and so we have to figure out a way to replace that. I could think of a couple of things we should have done. The XL Keystone Pipeline.
Yeah,
we were energy independent not too long ago.
Yeah.
But when you're relying on so much, you've got to have a plan to plug something else in before you unplug the other stuff.
Wow. All right. Well, Matt Dooley, thank you for your time today. Always great, insightful analysis, and we'll love to have you back soon. God bless you. God
Thanks.
love you. Have a great day.
God bless.
All right. That's going to do it for hour number 1 of Catholic Drive Time.